remember kind of your long-term vision. Because if you just look short-term, then every single time a problem comes up, you're going to go, you know what, why don't I just sell everything and get out of this game?
Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. Today we have a great guest and we know each other. This is kind of something different than normal, where most of the time I only just meet the guest a few minutes before we actually start recording. But Adam Schroederis is here with us today and we know each other for a while. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be around someone who knows the real German pronunciation of my name. So
yeah, well, and if people ask themselves, how do you know each other? As you can see here on the video, for those of you who watch us on video, Adam is a member of the organization Rent to Retirement, or RTR. So that's where we know each other from. But before we get to that, Adam, tell the audience a little bit who you are, where you're coming from, what you've done before.
I took a kind of circuitous path towards real estate investing. So I got started back in it was probably 06. I got started working at a financial talk radio station and just heard and met with a lot of people who were dealing with stocks and bonds. And one of the people there really promoted real estate. And this was back during the 0% down with low rates and all this stuff. You could buy massive amounts. And I don't think there was a limit with Fannie and Freddie at the time. So you could just get more and more and more properties. And then one of the co-owners of the station was a land developer doing some syndication stuff as well. And so I started learning about the real estate side while working there and seeing real estate versus stocks and bonds. And I saw some of the people in the Wall Street side who I would not want to trust with my money and knew that they weren't a one-off, we'll say. And so it turns out that the company I was working for, the talk show front, turns out that it was a Ponzi scheme. So got out of there once I found that out and ended up working for a real estate company, just helping with some marketing and working on that front and just learning more about the industry and the space. And that was actually a turnkey company. And eventually I started, getting on the podcast with them and doing a lot of work on that front and really learning the real estate space. And I started investing. I think my wife and I bought our first house in 2016, and we bought a couple of rehabs in Memphis, and then we bought a couple other rehabs, a couple in Jackson, Mississippi, some in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then we bought some new builds in the Atlanta, Georgia area, and sold off some of the rehabs that we had because we were having some tenant issues and just turnover. Because turnover and vacancy is what's going to kill you. And we were having some tenant turns that were pretty expensive, pretty consistently with those markets. So we said, yeah, we're out of here. And so we sold those off. And now we're doing some builds in Florida and kind of just always looking for the next investment. So that's, I've been helping people build their portfolios with turnkey companies for the last 6-7 years, somewhere in that range.
Thanks for describing that, Adam. What I'm hearing a little bit in between the lines is that patience seems to be important. What would you say to the audience about that? And what have you learned about it?
Real estate's really easy when you first get started, because you first get started, you get that tenant in place. It seems like it's never gonna go south because your tenant's paying rent that first month. There's no repairs. Everything's just great, right? It seems hunky-dory and you're never gonna have a downfall. And you got to just kind of keep sticking through it, because what you find is eventually you're going to hit a speed bump in real estate. And the problem with real estate is kind of the good part about it too. It's more liquid in some ways than stocks and bonds, but it's also a little less liquid. But really the problem becomes with you feel every single speed bump along the way. With stocks, people see, like, oh, I got $100,000 in my stock account and stocks went down 3% today, it'll go back up, right? And like everybody kind of thinks that, because that's just money that's off there on the side, kind of just completely out of sight, out of mind. It's going to grow long term, right? Like, I'm not saying that it's money that isn't real. Eventually it's going to become real, but it's a lot easier to say, okay, I took a bump today, tomorrow will be better, 6 months or a year from now it's going to be better. Well, if you just invested $100,000 in real estate and something happens and you get a $3,000 bill, that's $3,000 you have to pay today, and that part stinks. But a lot of people think about that 3,000 more than they think about, okay, in 6 months, a year, 5, 10 years from now, the cash flow I'm going to get from this property, the appreciation I'm going to see in this property, the tax benefits I'm going to get on this property, you know, those are farther out in the future and more, esoteric than the fact that today I owed $3,000. So you got to just kind of stick through it and see everything that's happening and remember kind of your long-term vision. Because if you just look short-term, then every single time a problem comes up, you're going to go, you know what, why don't I just sell everything and, get out of this game?
Right, yeah, exactly. And I think this is a little bit, I agree with you very much. And it's my experience too. I have to actually say, in the last 5 years, only really the last year has been having some of those, what you call bumps or struggles or stuff. That doesn't mean that there wasn't turns or stuff, but sometimes you're lucky and you have a turn and the property was well kept by the tenants and you just do minor cleaning and a little bit of touch up and you can rent it a month later again. Which leads me to the question, you mentioned that you kind of transitioned a little bit from like renovated properties to more new build properties. Tell us and the audience a little bit on how does that, if at all, change the tenants that you're attracting?
I thought a lot about this over the last few years, and I love my rehabs because they give me good cash flow. But the upshot in appreciation is lower, the upshot in rent growth is lower. And that's primarily because you have to think about who you're renting to. Nearly every single property manager is going to require 3 times income to rent, right? So if you're dealing with somebody who's paying $1,000 in rent, most likely they're making $3,000 a month or $36,000 for the year. If you're dealing with someone who's paying $2,000 a month in rent, most likely they're making about 6,000 or more a month. So their household income is $72,000. So, proportionally, you're looking at the same thing, right? But when it comes down to it, let's say someone's making $36,000 and they have a medical expense of, $2,000 that month. That's a lot more of their overall income. And so some of the other things get bumped back. So they might think, you know what? I have to not pay rent this month because I did that, or maybe I can only pay $400 now this month because I just don't have that cushion financially. Whereas if you're dealing with someone who's making $70,000, $80,000 a year, they have a lot more flexibility in terms of the ability to save up the money, the ability to continue paying their rent, even if they have something come up that they have to pay. And so I just prefer going after those tenants now. I mean, there's still going to be issues that come up with them. You still have to evict some tenants that are making that, 18, 19, $2,000 a month rent payments. But whenever it's all said and done, you're dealing with a better tenant quality. I hate to say it, but your tenant quality, the ability to pay the rent consistently month in and month out is there more for the people who are making the higher amounts of money. And they've just found that, it's potentially when you get up to that $70,000, $80,000 household income that one parent might be staying home with the kids. And that generally has led to a better home life that leads to being easier on the property than if, both parents are working, or if it's a single parent who has to work and the kids end up staying home alone more. Because when kids, I'm sure a lot of people out there know, when kids are left alone, good things don't always happen, we'll say.
Right, exactly. And those kids could be the four-legged kind too, right? Like so.
Yes, I'm a big proponent of pet deposits and pet rent when it's available because they do wear and tear, and their little paws can scratch things up a lot more than kids running barefoot around the house. So
Yeah,
yes, I'm a big
absolutely.
proponent of that.
Now, are those tenants in your experience? And I have to admit, I mean, from our collaboration that mine is still not finished in Florida, so I can't really say how it's going to behave. But in general, I'm kind of curious, are people who can afford to pay like 2,000, 2,200, 2,400 in rent and they go for a relatively new house, are they still on that trajectory, or do you feel they have made a decision, for me, renting is better than owning?
Yeah, I think I've seen about the same length of tenant stay in my new builds as I have in the rehabs. It's not like they're, getting in and getting out faster. And I think a lot of that is just because home prices have gone up so much recently. And especially, it's not just that. So we're buying homes that are, sub $400,000, and they're not building many of those homes anymore. I mean, because builders have found over the last 15 years or so that their profit margins on those homes that are 300, $250,000, They make a lot more if they do a custom build for 600,000 or 700,000 or even up higher than that. And so the percentage of homes that are being built that are in that 250 to $400,000 range is very small. So if you're able to go in and buy those homes that people want, you've got a couple of different options. Those people, you have to remember, so if they can't find a home that's sub $400,000, now they have to look at stuff that's 500,000, 600,000, and that's a hefty down payment for anybody, because you figure, first time home buyer, if they are still going to have 5% at a minimum, I believe. And so you're still looking at saving up $20,000. For a lot of Americans, saving $20,000 isn't high on their priority list. A lot of them, they're still, working with around, $5,000 to $10,000 maybe, because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. And so, waiting for them to save up that money, if they really want to be getting up to the 10 or 20% that they're going to be putting down, that can be a substantial, deterrent for them. And so if you can provide a thing where they're coming in and it's brand new and it still has that new car smell, a lot of times they start thinking about it as, oh, okay, this is our home. This is where we live. And so then, as I'm sure a lot of people know, moving's awful. It's just a terrible experience. And I found that, a lot of the people I know who are my age or even a little younger, their home ownership has kind of become a thing that they assume isn't really in their future, because prices are higher, interest rates are higher. But even when interest rates weren't as high, the idea of they're still looking at prices their parents were paying for homes. And like, if I was stuck on the price that my parents paid for their home, I'd be looking for $120,000 home. And I 100% couldn't find it anywhere around where I'm living now, even around where my parents are living, right? So, we're still stuck a little bit in the pre-COVID mindset of pricing. And now that we've seen high interest rates, people have just gotten disillusioned with the idea of owning a home. So I haven't seen any, kind of people running for new construction outside of the bills that we have. Just the places they want to live, they don't exist.
Right, understand. And I would agree with that. Now, one thing that I recently saw that I thought was kind of interesting, and that was related to the 30-year mortgage. The idea was, and I'm also bringing it up because you're working for rent to retirement to some extent, right? So there is the investor side, but there's also, in a way, the tenant side we just touched on. So if you think about a 30-year mortgage and you get it somewhere between 30 and 40, then you would traditionally be able to say, okay, by the time I retire or close to it, the mortgage will be paid, and I basically don't have that expense anymore out of my whatever my retirement pay or my retirement savings might be. So you just said, well, people don't necessarily think that way anymore, also because it's not really the ratio between income and how much a house costs is not there anymore. What's your opinion about that? Does that mean that future generations will be forever tenants, or how will their retirement potentially look like if they don't become investors at some point?
I think a lot of people's retirement plans might be selling their parents' house and taking the profits from that. You look at it, when you look at it that way, I mean, if my parents still have the house that they're in, I'm going to get a nice windfall whenever they pass. But on the other hand, the costs of elder care has gotten so much, and with where Medicare and Medicaid and everything kick in, you pretty much have to sell it and use up all of that money if they're going to get access to it. So I think a lot of people's retirement plan, like I said, is, well, at some point my parents are going to die and I'm going to get money from them. Just because, I mean, I think it's a very high percentage of Americans who couldn't afford it if they had $1,000 expense this month. They don't have the savings to do it. And so the
Most likely.
retirement plans have also become, I'm just going to work until I die. If you're not getting in and not starting the investment process in some way, whether that is, I don't love 401ks because I don't like my employer telling me how I should invest my money and choosing the investments I'm going to make, but I completely understand taking advantage of the 401k. I mean, my wife still donates to hers because we don't need that income, but I don't like it. But if we don't take advantage of the match, then we're losing out on some money. But I think a lot of people that I talk with on the phone who are looking at investing have hit their 40s and realized, oh no, that's the thing I get from a lot of people is just, I looked at my future. And that's honestly why we started investing in real estate, is we looked at our future in 30 or 40 years and said, do we really want to trust the stock market being at the level that we need it to be and staying at the level? Because I mean, I've told this story to many people over time, but one of the cautionary tales that really led us to start reevaluating where we want to be is my father-in-law retired. He actually had to delay his retirement by 3 or 4 years because of the dot-com bust back in 2000. He was really close to retiring. Then suddenly his stock portfolio dropped 40%. So he had to work to build that up and wait for the market to go up. And then he did retire in 2006. And then 2008 happened and it
Mm.
went down and he had to go back to work. And we saw that and we were just like, this is not where we want to be. This isn't the way that we think it's going to go long term. So we need to think of another way to get out there. And a lot of times, unfortunately, I mean, I wish I'd gotten into real estate investing 10 years earlier, but we
Yeah.
didn't have the funds at the time. Yeah, everybody wishes they'd bought 10 years ago. But a lot of people are hitting their mid 40s and starting to evaluate their financial situation and thinking, I've got to come up with a different idea. I've got to come up with a way to get passive income. And so I would, anybody who's listening to this who's of any age, just look at what you're doing for retirement right now and figure out if you think that's the best way, whether it's real estate, whether it's stocks, whether it's bonds, whether it's day trading, whatever you're doing, and just seeing if that's the way you think you're going to be able to survive in 20, 30, 40 years. So, yeah, I mean, the life expectancy has definitely gone up. We've definitely seen that. I don't think the 30-year mortgage is going to change anytime soon just because there's no push for it. And I think a lot of people want to have paid off houses because of that, reducing it. As a real estate investor, leverage is your friend. I don't really ever want to have a paid off property because then I lose tax benefits and then I have a lot of money sitting in a house not doing anything for me.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the article that I referred to where I saw that little history about the 30-year mortgage was mainly asking, would it be sensible if you take the same reasoning to change it to a 40-year mortgage? I don't know if that will ever happen or not. One of the things you touched on, and I think what is sometimes missing, I'm really curious about your opinion about it. When we're talking about rent to retirement or actually purchasing residential real estate to build a retirement passive income portfolio, I feel oftentimes the discussion sounds like it's really only revolving around one property, right? Rather than what I'm, for example, doing and you're doing, you mentioned it already, is we're building a portfolio of multiple properties. Right. And for one, I believe there is no reason that you would ever really stop building the portfolio. But on the other hand, I'm also starting to think now, I'm obviously getting much closer to this retirement age now of, okay, even though I don't necessarily want to have all properties paid off, but getting some paid off so that those fluctuations, for example, those kind of bumps in the road where you suddenly have that $3,000 $4,000 maintenance issue or capex issue where you can say 3 or 4 properties out of my portfolio are fully paid, and so I'm basically getting 90% of the rent, right,
Yeah.
as cash flow. The other ones I'm still paying, and so it is anyway. I don't know anybody who doesn't have it in a sense like a waterfall where nobody bought all the properties at the same time that I'm aware of. So as you buy them, they also move forward with their payoff in the mortgages. And what would you think should be the goal longer term when you're working closer towards retirement, of how many, like, should 50% be paid off with like extra principal, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I will say I don't have any plans on paying any off, but I'm also still in my early 40s. So as I approach retirement age, looking at paying them off to get out of the debt, because it's going to start getting harder and harder to get loans as you get older and stop working and your income drops. You have to look at different types of loans and everything, and so it can be a little trickier at that point in time. I will say if they ever do go to a 40-year, I think we're just going to see a boom in pricing because people buy mostly based on what they can afford to pay every month. It's
Right.
not necessarily the interest rate or anything. It's how much can I afford to pay. So if they can pay $2,000 a month, then, if they are able to stretch it out to 40 years, that $2,000 a month is going to be able to support a higher priced home. People who own properties at that point are going to be in the driver's seat and seeing the growth and appreciation and everything. And I do fully agree with you that a lot of people, when they talk about their retirement, they start talking about one home. But I'll take you one step further and say they talk about one home in 1 year. A lot
Yeah,
of
right.
people are buying based on that first year pro forma.
Yeah.
and how it's going to perform, and just think, okay, if this is going to produce $250 a month and I want to make $10,000 a month in retirement, I'm going to need 40 homes to do it. And that seems like a very daunting number, right? A 40 home portfolio is a big portfolio. You're talking about putting in anywhere probably between, a million and, 3 or 4 million to buy that property, or to buy that amount of properties. But what people fail to remember is rent increases. They fail to think about appreciation and being able to pull some of that money out to rebuy other properties, or you can even do a refi into a lower loan amount if you're able to get a higher appraisal, and that way you can increase your cash flow that way. And so that's why I mean, if people just go to renttoretirement.com and look at the wealth calculator that Zach had built, even if you don't buy a property from us, use that calculator. I mean, because that one, you can set in your assumptions for rent growth, for appreciation, for property taxes. You can also set future expense growth as you're growing your portfolio, and so that you can see not just year one, but years 2 through 35 on the calculator, because there's a lot more years between 2 and 35 than there is year one. But a lot of people are only buying based on year one. And if you only buy based on year one, you're never going to buy anything in a really good area that has a lower return. But those are the ones that you see the higher rent growth, higher appreciation. And by year 3, 4, 5, you're outperforming a lot of the rehabs that you're in. And so, I will say a lot of people spend way too much time focusing on what is this going to do for me right now, and not focusing on, in 5, 10 years, where am I going to be? Because that's a lot harder to forecast. And it's just, you don't think about it, because suddenly, the properties I bought 7, 8 years ago were cash flowing, around $200 a month. Those same properties are now cash flowing me about $500 a month. So
Yeah,
now I only need 20 of those, cut the amount of properties I needed down to 20. And as they continue growing in rent, it's going to get, bigger. And it's, if I pay them off, suddenly I'm making, you know, $900, $1,000 a month. And I need a lot less of them at that point in time. I always tell people, kind of look at where you want to be and see how many properties you need to get there. And then add in 2, maybe 3 properties, because you're going to have vacancies. You're going to have expenses that come up. So you don't want to be like right there at the line. You want to be a little over the line, so that whenever problems happen, you're at that line you still want it to be.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't have a fancy calculator like rent to retirement, but about 3 years ago, I got so many people asking, can I ever really get 10,000 in passive income? So I made a little spreadsheet, the simple version of what Zach created for rent to retirement. I started out one property a year, first property and every other property, they're all like cookie cutter. And I make 300 cash flow. And you are a very nice landlord who only increases the rent by $50 per year. And you end up with 15 properties, and around year 13, 14, you're making $10,000. So most people completely get blown away when they see that spreadsheet, and they go on the right side and they see how, because like you said, it's actually even more after 10 years. It's not just $500 or something. It's like more closer to 1,000, even though you're still paying off the mortgage, obviously, the amount. But it's interesting. It's kind of the same thing when people look at compounding interest. It's another one of those kind of interesting formulas. One quick thing I also wanted to mention for the audience before we give you a chance to talk a little bit more about how people can get in touch with you. And that is, you mentioned the 401k, and it obviously depends from employer to employer and the circumstances. But what I want to say to everybody in the audience, it's always worth to ask your employer if it is possible to basically self-brokerage your 401k. What that means in a nutshell is, instead of some Fidelity or Vanguard or some kind of big mutual fund company that is making money by trading your investments as often as possible, you can say, okay, I want to look into something that I'm comfortable with, which, by the way, could include real estate, not directly. There are many, many opportunities to invest in real estate through 401k and IRA approved investments. But the most important thing is, you will quickly, if you just spend even a little bit of time, figure out what are you comfortable with. And if you do that every month, it is a totally different ballgame, a totally different thing than if you just have to trust somebody somewhere.
Yep.
Right. So that's kind of like just a little side thing. It's worth asking the question, can I self-brokerage? Can I self-invest with my 401k money?
And don't forget that you're paying those people even if they lose you money every year.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Well, yeah, most people, when I talk to new clients, they're always shocked to realize or to be told, how do they make money? Every time they switch you from this mutual fund to that mutual fund. I mean, what people also don't know, I don't want to go too deep, but there are way more mutual funds than there are stocks. And part of the reason is that most of the mutual funds don't have much more than a 4 to 5 year life expectancy, right? And then they're not performing well anymore, and then they're closed and a new one is open. And then obviously, whoever is managing your money, they have to take it out of the closed one and put it into a new one. And guess what? They get paid again for that transaction, right? So,
yeah. And I will tell people, just kind of going back to what you said a second ago, is even if you can't self-direct your 401k, and I think pretty much everyone can take a loan out against your 401k if you want, up to, I want to say it's like $50,000, but you can always check into that if they say no, if you really want to utilize that money in some ways. And even going back to the raises that you were talking about, I always like to look at it as, if you're going up to market or close to market with your rents, you have to remember you have a semi-captive audience. And I mentioned earlier that moving is awful and nobody wants to move. If
really,
you have a tenant who you're saying, I'm going to raise your rents, a total of $600 this year, and they say, okay, I'm going to move. First off, that move is going to cost them more than $600, and they probably aren't a tenant you wanted to keep long term anyway. So just keep that in mind as you're raising rents. I'm not saying that, oh, you should raise it, $100 or $150 every year, because they're not going to move. They will move eventually, but if you're getting up to market, or even close to market, people aren't going to move if they look around and see, oh, it's going to cost me this much to rent another place. So don't be afraid of rent increases as you go through it. Just make sure that your rent increase isn't going to end in a place where you're having to evict your tenant because they can't afford it. So just make sure you talk with your property manager, or if you're self-managing, making sure you're looking at their income and that it can actually support the rent that you're taking it to. So that is a very important thing to keep in mind.
how would it look like if somebody says, I want to work with Adam and kind of get started on this?
As for people getting in, working with me and what we do, we have new construction and rehab properties all across the Midwest and the Southeast, because that's really where the growth in the country is happening. Whenever you look at it, like, that's where you've got landlord friendly legislation, because there's a lot of places in the country where your tenant has as many, if not more, rights than you do as a landlord, and we don't want to be there. I've heard horror stories talking with people on the phone about their portfolio. There was a woman who sticks out in my head very frequently, who'd been trying to evict her tenant in New York for 18 months. Whenever I talked with her tenant had not paid rent in 18 months, and she could not get rid of them because they had their squatters' rights, and the courts were so backed up and all of that stuff. It was an absolute nightmare. I felt terrible for her, but there's literally nothing that, they can do or I could do for them in that situation. But what it looks like is just, it starts with a conversation. I mean, we get together, and what I want to hear in that first call is, what are you trying to do with real estate? I mean, Axel helps you with the whole thing. I'm here specifically to say, what are you trying to do with real estate? Are you trying to get to 10 grand? Are you trying to get to 4 grand so that you can, use that with your other stuff? Are you just building it as a portfolio to hand off to your kids later? How are you going to use real estate? And then once we know that, then we can look at it and say, oh, this is how you want to use real estate. How much money do you have to use towards real estate now? Okay, you've got this much money to use towards real estate. Let's see what's actually available that can, what's realistic for you buying. Because if you come to me and say, I've got $40,000, I'm not going to say, well, look at this $300,000 new build, because that's not gonna work for you, right? So it might be, okay, well, let's look and see, what can you get for 40,000? Or, okay, if you don't like the ones you can get with $40,000, how are you going to get to 50 or 60,000 where you can buy the new build that you're wanting to get into? So, I just help you formulate your real estate plan. I'm not here to tell you, don't forget to invest in these stocks, because that's not my domain. Or invest in your IRA or 401k. I have no clue what to do with those. But when it comes to building your actual real estate portfolio, I'm here to help you kind of figure all of that out. And we've got properties, but we've also got lenders, we've got insurance agents, we've got, where to find your inspectors. We've got everything you're going to need. We've got the property management set up in that market that we're in, so that it can be, we are a turnkey company. So we try to provide the turnkey experience where it's as plug and play as you want it to be. Now, I do want to say, we are a turnkey company. We have the whole team, but we always tell you to do your own due diligence, because we try to get our numbers right, but our numbers can be wrong, or we might run with different assumptions than you do. So, I always tell people, do your own due diligence on these things and don't just trust us. Because we try, but if you're looking at like property tax numbers, those are a nightmare to figure out. I don't know who all's looked at their property tax numbers, but it's always different. There's a reason they do the escrow analysis at the end of every year, because even your mortgage company doesn't know. I always laugh that my wife and I bought those 3 new builds in Atlanta. They were the exact same floor plan, exact same price. We closed all of them within 6 months, and they all had 3 different amounts escrowed for property taxes.
Yeah.
Explain that one to me.
On top of that, I had one of those examples just for the audience where I saw a really pretty substantial jump in a property in Illinois, allocating property taxes by kind of, in a sense, redistricting. Had nothing to do with politics, just like what counts for this and what counts for that and which bond counts for that. And suddenly I had $185 more per month in property taxes, not because they evaluated the house different or new bonds were issued, but just because suddenly the house was considered to be part of this particular zone.
You're on a different side of the line.
Yeah, so to speak, than before. So it can be the craziest stuff, even while you're already owning it and you have started to calculating, and then it can jump. So I totally hear what you're saying, and the audience should be aware of it. Now, one other thing, what makes our episode today a little special, I said in the beginning that you and I know each other for a while, but I also want the audience to realize, when I normally in the solo episodes, I always say we work with turnkey providers, and we typically get properties that you don't find necessarily on Zillow or Redfin and stuff. And Adam, you're representing one of those organizations that we have taken properties, or basically worked with you to get our clients properties from your inventory. And I want people to understand. So we are working and know each other and work together.
Yeah,
not just...
absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the big things. One of the things I really love is these deals are off market. A lot of times we're putting them under contract before the build is complete or the rehab's done. But it's also, we saw even during COVID, we went through it, and it's a first come, first serve, no bidding war. If you see a price on the website and say, Adam, I'm pre-approved and I want to get 123 Main Street. If there's somebody ahead of you who's already inquired about it and reserved the property, you could offer me 10 grand, 20 grand extra, and it's not going to bump you up on the list. If you're the top one and you want to pay 10 or 20 grand more, I'll take it. I'll take tips, all that, but nobody's ever willing to do it. Yeah. But we're very much if you're pre-approved and you see a house you want and no other pre-approved person has asked for it, then the property's yours. That's another thing I really love is it's not a question of a bidding war. We're not trying to compete with investors, because we know we wouldn't like it if someone did that to us. It'd be a nightmare to do. It'd be horrible reputation wise. So, the price is the price if it works for everybody. And that's one of the things I love about real estate is it's literally a situation where every single person in the transaction can win. The investor ends up getting a really good property. We get paid at close of sale for building the team and finding, and helping you get connected with everyone. The seller gets the price that they need to go and do the next flip or the next build. Your property management gets new client to pay with. Your tenant gets a really good place to live. Everything, just, the insurance agent gets their money that they can get paid on. The inspector gets paid. So literally it's like, 10 people winning in the deal and nobody ends up losing. So that's one of the things that I absolutely love about real estate investing that I don't think I can say about any other form of investing that you do.
Right, exactly. Very well said. So with all that being said, I always have 1 or 2 questions at the end. So today, if you could meet anybody, Adam, who would it be and why?
It's going to sound corny, and if you're not religious, I'd love to go back in time and see if Jesus was the real man and just see what's going on there, just because it's something that always interests me, and is too many wars have been fought and too many lives have been lost debating whether or not it's real. So that might be where I'd go. If I could meet anybody alive, I would love to go, or any event I could go back to. I thought about this during the Democratic National Convention. I'd love to go see Bill Clinton speak in his prime. I love him or hate him with his, I was in debate growing up and I love public speaking, and that man is the best speech giver. Listening to him give his speeches, the best I've heard in a long time. He's probably the best speech giver I've seen in 40 years that I've been around. So
it's always unfortunate when some kind of event, however horrible it may be, is kind of stuck to you, that has nothing to do with the topic at hand. And I agree with you. He was an amazing orator when in his prime. On the Jesus thing, if I were to track along, I would have all kinds of questions about the stuff that the Bible says, like just tell the guy to not be a wimp and walk away, and everybody said, oh, he can walk, or then you give him just some grape juice and they said you made wine out of water or water out of wine. And
yeah, there's so many questions. And like I said, it's wars over religion have been fought, not just one of those things.
But I wonder what really happened. And so if you go, I want to go with you and then want to kind of ask, hey, did this really happen, or did they just tell it until it sounded good?
Yep.
All right, Adam, it was a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.